Is a BSM alumni from Tarleton, is a professional counselor in training. But one of the lessons she has been teaching churches in our area for several years is called the 5 Thresholds of Faith. And it is super helpful to understand where, all of your non-Christian friends are at different stages when it comes to how open they are to the gospel. And so this training will help you identify where your non-Christian friends are so that you can be helpful in the specific way that each one needs.
The handout is more just so that you have kind of an overview of what we talked about today for future reference. We're going to hit points on that. We may not hit every last bit of it, but it's just so that you have it. The other thing you need to know is I did not come up with any of this. I am not that smart. This is basically a summary from this book that's called I Once Was Lost. And so if this is really helpful for you today, I would highly recommend reading this book. It's just really helpful in taking you a step deeper, because today we're just going to hit the flyover, okay? So, like Gary said, my name is Morgan, and I am a LPC associate, so licensed professional counselor associate. You need to know that I majored in people because I cannot draw, I cannot do math, and I cannot spell, which is important because I'm going to attempt drawing and spelling today. So I just need you to know that I don't do those things well, which is why I majored in people, okay? But we're going to talk about the 5 thresholds, which, like Gary said, is the stages that we see non-believers move through when coming to faith. I read this book the summer after my senior year of college, and I wish that I had been exposed to it before that, because I think it would have changed the way that I related to my classmates in undergrad, because it drastically changed the way that I related to my classmates in my master's program. And so I hope that this is as helpful for you as it was for me. I have found that there's 2 ways that you can use the 5 thresholds. One of them is internal, and it shapes the lens in which you interact with people and the lens that you are watching people and listening to people in conversations. But there's also an external use for it. You can use it as an evangelism tool and sit down and say, let me share these thresholds with you. Where are you at? And so we're going to talk about both of those, but I'm going to use this internal perspective to kind of walk you through them, okay? So the first threshold that we have is trusting a Christian. There are, that's going to, see, I don't draw. So I've been out of high school 10 years, okay? So I started college in fall of 2012. And when I started college 10 years ago, there was still a degree of Christians in church being trustworthy. So when I showed up on campus, I could tell people that I was a Christian or talk about going to church, and I didn't automatically have to fight an uphill battle. There was some level of trust that was there. What I have seen being on the college campus over the past 10 years is that has steadily decreased. And more, when I interact with people who don't know Jesus, they do not trust me or the church because I'm a Christian. So they start in this place of distrust. The reason that this is important to note is because if somebody doesn't trust me as a Christian, why are they going to listen to what I have to say about spiritual things if they don't trust me as a person? Okay? So a person's path of coming to know faith really begins to gain traction when they realize that they can move from this place of distrust of Christians to a place of trust. Okay? On the inside of this card that you got is you'll see on one side it has the 5 thresholds, and there's summaries of each one. So if you kind of want to use those to follow along, you can as well. But we have to earn people's trust now more than ever in order to talk to them about spiritual things, okay? When I started my master's, like I said, I had just read this book about a year before, and so I prayed that God would give me one friend in my class. My class was really small. That first semester, there was only 12 of us, and by the time we made it into the program, for counseling, it was only 8 of us. But that first, it was all girls, which meant there was a lot of drama, but that's a story for another day. Somebody laughed, thank you. I also appreciate it if you laugh. I think I'm funny. So you can laugh at me. It's okay. Um, but I prayed that God would give me one friend, and I sat behind a girl, um, and I decided I want to be her friend. So from that week forward, I sat next to her in class and just slowly began to be friends with her. It was really evident that she didn't trust me. She started out here. Um, and so for a year and a half, I was I would do every group project I could with her. I would try to hang out with her outside of class. My roommates and I were praying for her because I just really felt like I needed to be her friend. And she was really open about not liking. She didn't have a problem with the fact that I was a Christian, but she didn't want to hear anything that I had to say. She was really standoffish. Christianity was not for her. God was not for her. She was respectful, but she was very firm in that. And so over the course of the next year and a half, I began to build a relationship with her, but I had to really fight against these core reactions that I had to her distrust for me. So if you'll handout, there's 5 things there that we as Christians have a tendency to respond to people, ways that we have a tendency to respond to people who don't trust us. We become defensive, we take offense, we avoid them, we are judgmental or condescending, or we want to argue our point. Okay? I think these are really important to point out because all of us are going to have natural tendencies if somebody doesn't trust you. And we need to know which one of those is our natural tendency so that we know how to counter that in a way that builds trust. Because all 5 of those reactions, they're not responses, they're reactions because it's our instinct reaction, right? Those are not trust building. Do you trust people that avoid you or need to defend their stance or just want to argue with you? Right? Those aren't trust building actions. And if we want them to trust us, we need to live our lives in such a way that is trustworthy. When somebody naturally doesn't trust me, the things that I had to guard against with this classmate, we're just going to put an M up here for this represents my classmate, okay? I had to really guard against taking offense and being condescending or judging. Because my initial reaction when she would not trust me or she wouldn't like step into vulnerability with me so that I could witness to her and love on her well was to say internally, you don't have a right to not trust me. This is just me being fully vulnerable with y'all, okay? I am not a compassionate person by nature. The Holy Spirit has made me such. My initial reaction was, I'm not the sinner here, I am Jesus. Okay? It's like, how dare you? I am the one that knows Jesus and I just want to love you. And I was offended by the fact that she didn't trust me. And then immediately became judgmental of the fact that she didn't know Jesus and wasn't living her life for the Lord. Those were my sin nature reactions. And it was so important for me to know those because I needed to know how to counter them. So if you'll jump down to the next, right underneath that, it says, instead we should. If you're a defender, the first thing you should do is pray. If you feel the need to defend your stance against somebody that doesn't trust you, which is different than defending your faith, okay? When you feel the need to defend yourself against someone that doesn't trust you, you need to pray. When you feel the need to take offense, we need to be learners. And so I had to really work hard to seek to understand her perspective. I wanted to ask her questions that helped me understand and learn about why she didn't want to know about God and why she didn't trust me. If you're an avoider, you want to bond. It's like that polar opposite. For those of you that are avoiders, you're like, right? But instead of avoiding, what does it look like to step in and say, I'm going to choose to bond with you instead of run from you? Which, as an avoider, if you're here and you're an avoider, that may be one of the most uncomfortable ones because it is so vastly opposite. So I just need to acknowledge that. That's really difficult. Instead of judging, affirm. I didn't look to affirm the sin in her life, but I did look to affirm the strengths in her life and the character and the qualities that God had gifted her with. She was passionate about serving people and seeing people live healthy lives, mentally and emotionally healthy lives. And that is admirable because if that passion were to be transformed by the gospel, she would be unstoppable for the kingdom. So I looked for qualities in her life that I could say, man, this is a good quality. And if she would surrender this to the Lordship of Christ, how unstoppable would she be? And I wanted to affirm those things. And if you're an arguer, you want to welcome. You can win an argument and lose the war. Okay? Some people just want to argue. But when it comes to these kinds of things, you can win in that moment. But when that person walks away, do they feel loved and empowered? Or do they feel like they were just railroaded and run over and embarrassed because you proved a point at their expense? And so we don't want to argue. We want to welcome. We want to be encouraging, right, in those conversations. And these are so important, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time, because before someone can enter into a relationship with Jesus, if they don't trust you, they've got to move into this first threshold, which is where they really begin to gain traction. Because once they trust a Christian, they're going to be open to the rest of the things that follow. Okay? Any thoughts or comments before I move to the next threshold? All right. The next one is curious. Okay? Once a person begins to trust you, they can trust you and not be curious. My classmate trusted me for a long time and was not curious about spiritual things. The day that I realized that my classmate had moved from a place of distrust to trust, we were sitting in my driveway. I knew it was supposed to rain that night. This might be kind of shady, but I knew it was supposed to rain that night, so I got a ride to campus that morning from one of my roommates so that I could ask her for a ride home from campus after class that night, because I was just looking for ways to spend time with her. And she lived 45 minutes away. She was a commuter. And so if we didn't get to hang out before and after class, I really didn't get to see her. She was fine. Like, she was like, oh, I'd love to give you a ride. So it worked out. But we were sitting in my driveway, and I couldn't tell you the context of the conversation. But she said, every Christian friend I've had before you, when I told them that I wasn't interested in spiritual things, or I wasn't interested in God, they just stopped being my friend because I was a project. And you didn't do that. And because of that, I feel like I can trust Christians again. And so, but she had no clue of these thresholds. But because I knew of them, I became acutely aware in that moment, she has begun her path to faith. She has moved into a place where now she can trust Christians, which means we can start gaining some traction in other places. But she was not curious, and I know that because about 5 minutes later, my little sister walked in front of the car. I lived with my sister, my two younger sisters at the time. And she said, your relationship with your sisters is just really interesting to me. Like, y'all have a really good relationship. And I said, well, we didn't always have a good relationship. But as each one of us came to college, we grew up knowing Jesus. But as each one of us came to college, we realized our need for Jesus and our need to follow Jesus because we're separated from God because of our sin. And because of what Jesus did on the cross, he was worth having our lives. And so when we committed our lives to really following Christ and making Jesus Lord of our life, it completely transformed our relationships. I told her the gospel, but I didn't sit down and draw the 3 circles or the bridge. But she heard the gospel. And if she was curious, she would have asked me a couple of questions. But her response was, oh, that's interesting, and completely changed the subject. Now, my temptation, which I would assume most of us have the temptation in that moment, is to try to bring it back. I just shared the gospel. I just told you the gospel. You have nothing? Like, come on, right? But if I would have done that, it would have confirmed her greatest fear, that she was just a project to me. But when I met her in that area of trust, she heard the gospel. She heard about God's love. And I hope that in walking with her as she navigated out of that, she saw God's love because I was willing to move with her as she was ready. So she trusted me, but she wasn't curious. So my roommates and I continued to pray for her. I continued to be her friend. As somebody moves in to the threshold of curiosity, this is when they start asking questions about just God in general or spiritual things. On your little card, it's summarized as your friend has some questions about faith, but it's not personal for them. I've hung out with curious people, and their curiosity showed up in like they wanted to know what the Bible said about dinosaurs. Okay, it's like that doesn't pertain to the gospel, but okay. They wanted to know about the Bible. They were curious about concepts of Scripture, and they wanted to talk about it. Here in a little bit, we're going to talk about seeking. You need to note that curiosity and seeking can look very similar. Curious people are curious about faith things or spiritual things as a whole or God as a whole. They're not necessarily asking questions about Jesus yet. Okay? When you meet somebody that's curious, this is on your paper, they're seeking awareness, engagement, and exchange. They're becoming aware that there's thoughts different than what they've been living by, and they want to explore that. They want to engage about it. They want to explore the other options, and they want you to talk with them about it and wrestle through that with them. They don't want you to tell them why they're wrong. Okay? They want you to meet them in that and have an exchange. How did you come to these conclusions and these beliefs? This is a total side note, but I listened to a speaker the other day talk about secular student organizations on campuses, which are made up, you have to identify as atheist or agnostic in order to be a member of a secular student org on a campus. And she did a study of 5 major campuses here, and what she found was that, and she's a believer, she did this for her PhD project for seminary, her research project. What she found was those students said, I want people to tell me how they came to these convictions and beliefs. I don't want them to tell me what those convictions and beliefs are. Because I want to know how they got there and why they decided it was worth believing in instead of someone just telling them that it was worth believing in. So exchange with them. Be vulnerable and tell them how you came, the way that you wrestled with God to come to where you stand on this particular topic. Let them see that. They want to see how you came to these convictions, and they want to have exchanges about that because that is meaningful to them. Okay? So, when you're interacting with people who are curious, you want to encourage questions. Jesus asked a lot of questions, okay? Use parables. Tell stories that leave people thinking. Jesus also used a lot of parables. And live curiously. If you're not living your life in such a way where people look at it and go, why are you different? Then I really want to challenge you to assess what things in your life need to change. Because on your college campus today, you should look vastly different than the people that you live next to. When I came on when I set foot on my campus 10 years ago, I looked different, but I didn't look near as different as y'all look today as Christ followers because the culture of our campuses have changed. Okay, so live curiously. As people move from curiosity, they move to this next space, which is open to change. Okay. Open to change is where the seed starts breaking the ground. They're going to start seeing the world in a different light and realize maybe there is something to all of these things that they've been exploring. Okay. You need to be really patient with people that are open to change because this is where they're going to begin the process of counting the cost. And counting the cost is really hard because it means if they move into a relationship with Jesus and make Jesus Lord of their life, then they're going to have to give some things up. And that's a really difficult process to walk through. And so when you're encountering people that are open to change, be patient with them because it can take time. This is where they're going to start asking questions past just curiosity and like questions about spirituality or the Bible as a whole. And they're going to start realizing that Jesus loves them. This is where Jesus starts coming into play. This is personal. This isn't just a big God. Like there is a personal relationship to be had with God through Jesus. When you're with people that are open to change, you want to challenge as Jesus challenged. So you'll see several parts there where you can go in and read those later. But Jesus stepped into where people were at. They were open to change, and he met them where they were. For some, that meant stepping into their pain and challenging them graciously in their pain. For some, like Nicodemus, Jesus kind of stepped in and stirred the pot a little bit. Okay, it really challenged him to think differently. But you want to make sure that when you're interacting with people that are open to change, you're meeting them where they are, not where you think they are, because you want to challenge the appropriate way. Okay. From open to change, they're going to move to seeking. Seeking is where they start saying, who is Jesus exactly, and what is Jesus' effect on my life? This is where you're going to see them start spending tons and tons and tons of time around Christians. They're going to start showing up to more events. They're going to start asking personalized questions. In the book, there's a whole section on how to be a seeker host or a seeker guide. When you're seeking friends show up, you are to be the translator. Hey, so we took a kid to fall retreat one time. He was not seeking. He barely trusts us. Catch me after and I'll tell you about my first encounter with him and what he told me his view of God sitting in heaven was. It's quite humorous. He loves the Lord now, which makes it even better. But he showed up and he had no clue why we sang. To fall retreat. So we went to fall retreat and we had our first worship service and we were singing. And he was in the middle of worship, you could hear him. It was a small group. A room was not much bigger than this. And you could hear him over the crowd look at Daniel and go, "Why are we singing?" He had no clue. And then worship ended and he started clapping. And Daniel was like, "You don't have to clap." And he's like, "But don't you clap when people get done singing?" He had no clue. He needed somebody to translate the experience for him because he didn't know any better. And so when you're hanging out with seekers, one, we're teaching them about Jesus and Jesus' impact on their life, but we're also explaining everything to them so that they feel safe and comfortable to continue seeking Jesus, okay? A seeker is going to be their change is going to be pretty internal, and they're going to be very, very heavily counting the cost. We need to be disciplined to show them how to build their life around the Word, show them how to read the Bible, show them how to pray, open your prayer life to them. One of my favorite stories about prayer and opening your prayer life to them is Pootie's. And I just think about Pootie walking in and I have this right, correct? Guys, she dumped a jar and her name was in the jar over and over and over again because people were praying for her. Let them know that you pray for them and how you pray for them. Open your prayer life to them. And provide satisfying questions, and sometimes a satisfying answer. Sometimes a satisfying answer is saying, "I don't know. Why don't you and I sit down and find it together so that I can show you how I found this answer?" And so it's a step past, "Let me look into that and get back to you." Why don't we look it up together so that you can learn how to find these answers for yourself? And creating safe space. How are we creating space where they feel comfortable? My classmate, so when I left my classmate, she was hanging out here, okay? Took about a year and a half, but the last time I really spent extended amount of time with her, she just trusted me. She was a 9-hour student, I was a 6-hour student, and so she was a year ahead of me. And so the semester that our class load changed and we started taking different classes was also the semester I moved to Fort Worth. And so our paths didn't cross. We didn't run in the same circle. She was graduating and starting work. But about a year, right before I left, she started dating a guy that claimed to be a believer. And so she would talk to me about this guy and how he was a Christian and he was really sweet and he would pray for her. And over the course of the next year or so, they got engaged and they were getting ready to get married. And I got a message from her on Facebook saying, "Hey, you keep sharing this photographer on Facebook. That's really great. I want to get in touch with her." Well, that photographer was my former roommate that lived with me when we spent a year and a half praying for Courtney. She's a professional wedding photographer, shameless plug, if you need somebody I know, lady. And I said, "Yeah, of course I'll send you that information." And I was so excited because I knew that when she booked Caitlin was going to start praying for her because I have worked weddings with Caitlin. And I know that Caitlin prays for her clients before she goes into weddings. I know that Caitlin's perspective on all of her weddings is, how can I live and interact with these people in such a way where they see Jesus today? I was like, this is going to be great. So I still haven't seen, it's been a year and a half since I've seen her. And Caitlin is shooting her wedding and they're walking across the back, outside. And in the concrete, there was somebody had drawn in the concrete and it said, "God loves you." And she stopped and said, "Caitlin, look, God loves me." And that was not the classmate that I knew a year and a half before. So I go to the wedding, it's great, we reconnect, and then I get a thank you card in the mail a couple weeks later, and it's quoted scripture on it. And it was one of the scriptures from one of the letters in the New Testament written by Paul, where it says, one of the many times where he's thanking the Lord for fellow believers, right? I'm like, okay, now I have to see her. So I text her, we sit down, we get coffee. And for the first time, I got to share the gospel with her. like draw out the gospel because I'm listening. I'm like, man, she definitely more than trusts me. Like God's doing some things here. And I said, hey, is it okay if I like share the gospel with you? And so I sit down and I share the gospel with her. At this point, it's probably 3 or 3.5 years since I met her. And she had moved in that year and a half-ish since I had seen her last. She had moved to where she was teetering this line. What I love about that is I had nothing to do with this. Our obedience to the Lord is saying, Lord, what is my role in helping this person move closer to you? And some of you will interact with people out here and you will get to walk with them all the way to the kingdom. Some of you will only get to be a part of helping them move through one threshold. But the beauty is that God's working before you get there and after you leave. And so success in sharing our faith, yes, we have to be obedient in sharing our faith. But it's not about how people respond, it's about whether or not we do it. And sometimes it is sitting down and sharing the gospel. And sometimes it's saying, what is my role in helping you move this much closer to God? And so in a year and a half, the Lord moved her from a place of trust to this kind of teetering. She was open to change. She was seeking. And I shared the gospel with her. And if I would have shared it with her however many years earlier, she would have moved right back out. But in that conversation, it very much began a counting the cost conversation. That was a couple years ago. I wish I could tell you that she's moved into the kingdom. She hasn't. She's still kind of hanging out here. And she'll like move into spaces where she's seeking, but she'll just decide. Because the thing about seekers is they don't hang out here very long. Okay, they're going to move from seeking somewhere else. The way that I respond, I don't know if the book says this. This is just one of my beliefs, so I do need to claim that. I believe that the difference in somebody that's seeking, jumping all the way back out here, or just moving somewhere back here, isn't completely dependent, but is heavily dependent on the way that I respond to them when they decide that they don't want to follow Jesus. Because if I respond with grace and unconditional love, then that's not going to send them all the way back here. But if I'm like, I can't believe you and follow Jesus, like, I don't have time for you anymore, I'm going to move on to the next project, they're going to come back out here and have to start over. So that is worth noting. The way that we respond to seekers, I think, plays a big part in where they land if they choose not to follow Jesus. When you share the gospel with seekers, you can share the gospel with people in other stages. It might look different. But this is where you're going to extend an invitation, and they're really going to go, do I want this? And decide whether or not they're going to move forward. So when the reason I share it this way is because this is internal. Note in that story, I never sat down with my classmate and shared this with her. Okay? I was just listening for the ways that she communicated and the way that she responded to different topics to help identify where she was. It was very much a lens. I was always looking to say, okay, Lord, show me where she is so that I know how to best meet her and help her move to the next place. One of the things I love about this is it can be external, okay? So on the cards that you have, these are from Gary. He has more if you need them. But I wanted you to have them because it's just a really good summary that you can carry in your pocket. And you'll see that it's linear there. I like this model because this just works better for my brain. I like the idea of a target. But you can use this as well. We're only going to look at the side that has the thresholds on it. The back half of it is great. You can read that later and decide how you want to use that. But you can pull this out and you can say, hey, I'm doing a survey about like where people stand on spiritual things or with God. Could I share these with you and would you tell me where you land? And so you can definitely use it as just like a survey on campus. But I have used this more than once with students that I've been getting to know or friends that I've been getting to know, and I can't quite figure out where they are with the Lord or on their path to the Lord. And so I've just said, hey, can I draw something for you? Like we're having these conversations about spiritual things. Can I draw this picture for you and will you give me some feedback? Like, yeah, absolutely. So I pull out a piece of paper, a napkin, whatever I have, and I draw these just as rough as it is up here. And I explain each one really quickly. And I say, where do you think you are? My last story, and then we'll do a couple quick questions. One year I shared the gospel with a student at our like faith fair the first week of school. She was really not interested, but she humored us. And she gave me her number, but she didn't trust Christians, and I know that because she would only hang out with me on Wednesdays at noon. After that, and she would not come to free lunch. She chose to go off campus and buy lunch every week because she would not step foot in our building, even though there was free food. So for a semester, every Wednesday we went off lunch and we had off campus and we had lunch. Um, and we didn't really get very far. I wouldn't even say, I mean, she trusted me, but I wouldn't go as far to say that she trusted like Christians as a whole. Um, but eventually we lost touch, and I got a text. We would see each other on campus, but it was really sporadic. And I got a text from her about 3 years later that said, "I'm ready to start a relationship with Jesus. I thought you could help me." And I was like, yes. So I was like, let's get coffee. This is going to be great. So we sit down for coffee, and an hour and a half later, I'm mad. She's mad. I'm ready to like flip the table because I would share the gospel with her, and she's like, but what about this? And I'm like, that's the gospel. You want a relationship with Jesus. Accept Jesus. But what about this? So we'd talk about that, and he'd be like, but the gospel. And we'd come back to the gospel, and we were just frustrated because she said, I want to start a relationship with Jesus. So I finally said, hold on, I'm going to draw something for you. At that time, I didn't draw it because I had a copy of this in my backpack. I pulled it out, and I walked her through each threshold, and I said, where are you? Because she talked like she was here, right? I want to start a relationship with Jesus. Sounds like somebody that's ready to enter into the kingdom. But when I explained the thresholds to her, she was barely here. Like she had just entered the curious threshold, which changed our conversation. We still talked about Jesus. We still talked about the gospel. But she had a lot of other questions that she needed answered because she wasn't really worried about Jesus' effect on her life. She was worried about all of these other things that she was just curious about. So we started reading the Bible weekly and meeting and talking about it. And I watched her move through these thresholds. And she got right here. I mean, she was there. She started bringing her boyfriend, and we would talk. And it was a lot of fun because one time I pulled it out with her boyfriend there, and I said, where are you? And I said, where do you think she is? And he's like, oh, this is how I've seen her change. This is where I think she is. So this can be a really great conversation, like discussion with people, and bring out really great questions, which is another good way to use it. But ultimately, she decided not to start a relationship with Jesus. And she's kind of back probably in this like curious space. But I love the 5 thresholds for a lot of reasons because internally it was a huge perspective shift for me. It changed the way I met people where they were at to help move them closer to Christ. But it's also a great tool on paper. And I've had some great conversations with people because I've said, hey, here's these things. Where are you at? Why do you think you're there? What would it take for you to move to the next threshold? And it just can be a really great conversation starter. And so this is more of a like, hey, here's this idea. Use this to shape the way you interact with people. But there are some like, you could take this on campus and use it as a survey type thing. But for me, it's much more of an internal perspective shift and has helped me prayerfully identify where people are at. And so that's why I love the 5 thresholds so much. So I'm also really bad at putting a bow on things. So that's all I have for you. What questions do you have or thoughts do you have? Yes. I'm listening. I'm going to grab water.
I had before I was a Christian is that it really seems like, listening to sermons or vertical and listening to like music or some stuff kind of faith, it seems like they're just trying to sell me something instead of like trying to let me like experience Christ. So, and that's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people because it seems like it's meaningless. So my question for you is throughout this entire process, how do we mitigate that?
Great question. So the speaker that I was talking about, her whole point was and more y'all's generation than any generation before you, is Christians are trying to sell me something. Christianity is an institution. Because everything around y'all is institutionalized. Okay? And so that's the tension that they're feeling. You're just trying to sell me something else. This isn't personal for you. And so a big part of that, so when we share the gospel, we do it in different ways. You go out, you share the gospel. The gospel, we call that cold turkey evangelism on our campus, okay? You go out, you share the gospel, you do surveys, which is fantastic. It's a great practice. There's also very relational, okay, which is kind of what you're talking about here. And that relational, that relationship that you have with people, and again, more so y'all's generation than anything, they want to see you wrestle with these things and why you decided it was worth it. And so, yeah, man, I can totally see how, that feels like it's a selling thing to you. What's one of the biggest questions that you have about faith or about Christianity, and that maybe I could tell you I wrestled with and how I wrestled with it? Or what's one of the biggest things in your relationship with God that you have had to wrestle with God over? Do I believe this or do I not? You say, man, I get that. There was this time in my walk with the Lord where I really had to wrestle with what God said about this and whether or not I believed it. And this is what that process looked like. Because that's no longer selling them an ideal or an idea. It's letting them into your vulnerable space of your walk with the Lord and the process in which you had to navigate that. The hard thing about that is and I had just had this conversation with a student yesterday, what if they won't even listen to you talk about that? What if, you have a relationship with them, but they won't even entertain the idea, like my classmate? It had to start with the way that I the way I interacted with her and the way that I treated her. Because it didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter what she did. I challenged myself to learn, right, and to affirm her, because those were my two pitfalls on the trust threshold. And I stepped into that relationship with her and, in a sense, almost challenged her. This is what you expect from me, but what if I do the thing that you don't expect? And I ride the wave with you, which is sometimes a little bit harder. I realize that's not a straight answer. It's more of a broad thing, but it's that awareness of, okay, how do I step into this and really be willing to step in deeper, because that's what they want. They want to see past what's being said from a stage. They want to know why I believe it and why I think it's worth it. Does that make sense? Ish.
For someone to be in the open to change section, do they have to be completely open to change, or
No. I've seen people that they're open to change, but there's still things in their life they're not willing to let go of. So this student right here, she was open to changing a lot of things in her life, but she wasn't open to stop sleeping with her boyfriend. So she was open to everything else, but she's like, I can't give that up, which really prevented her for a while from moving here, because she's like, I'm not willing to give that up. But it's the process and that's why open to change takes time, because it was a process of coming to this reality of, okay, I'm slowly open to change in different areas of my life. And then you see how Jesus begins to affect those as they begin realizing. Because remember, this is the process of where Jesus starts to come into their vocabulary. So how Jesus slowly starts affecting those things, and they realize it's worth giving up to know Jesus. Okay. One more question.
Okay, so about I guess with curiosity, and then if you have a friend who's gay, trans, or something like that, and they're asking what does the Bible say about it, how do you approach that? Because I mean, you can't lie to them, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That may be a deeper conversation than what we can answer from stage, or in the moment. Gary, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I do. We talk to, obviously we talk to people who are LGBT all the time. And I think when some of them ask that question, it could be coming from several different places
Yeah.
in the threshold. So some of them may not trust Christians, and all they're asking is, do you hate me? And then there may be some who are just curious, like, I'm LGBT, but what exactly does the church teach? Because they don't know. then there may be some who are saying, what does the church teach? Because they're trying to weigh, okay, I'm interested in Jesus, but what would it actually mean for me practically if I were to follow Jesus? So they're counting the cost. So I would clarify, like try to get to the root of the question, why are you asking that?
Yeah. And that can be like, so something you need, just general, like good question asking tip. Why makes us all defensive. And so if you can figure out a way to reword a why question is to like, man, that's a really interesting question. What brought that question to your mind? Or something like that is really helpful. If it is an extended conversation where y'all are having like a deep conversation, there's time, I may say, hey, that really is a good question. I want to make sure that I answer the question that you are asking to the best of my ability. Can I explain a couple of different, like, can I draw a picture for you to find out where you're at so that I know how to best explain this to you? And I may show them this. I've never done that, but if I was in the right context, I would. Because if they can show me where they're at, it's going to help me answer their question directly to what they're asking. Because sometimes they also may not even know why, like where the question came from. But if you don't have time to draw this out, asking a clarifying question, man, that's a really good question. Or that's a question that I get a lot. What brought that question to your mind? So, because I want to better understand the best way to answer this question for you. Yeah, last one, then I think we've got to go.
Add on to that with personal experience.
Yeah, go.
Literally, with these people, the way you approach it, like talking to them about it, is I think probably the most important thing you can do. Because if someone's gay, for example, I think when you talk about Christianity or just like Western evangelical Christianity in general, what goes through your mind is like maybe you see on like a pride fest on television, and then there are street preachers to the side, or someone with a sign that says God hates. Yeah, so I've learned that, I think I've noticed that people are actually really open to actually really like considering it. It's just, you can't go up to them like that. You have to talk to them like one-on-one, and explain what you believe, and you can't be judgy about it. I think everyone would agree that Gen Z is really sensitive. And we don't like loud noises. And we don't like people yelling at us. I think the best thing that you can really do is just be honest, but also like talk to them one-on-one and be genuine about it. Like, don't like be rude.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to say this on that topic and then we'll be done because I'm already over my time. But one of our Fort Worth staff works at a TCC in Fort Worth. And their BSM, if you went on campus and you asked anybody that was associated with, like everybody's like, hey, you're affiliated with BSM, are you a believer? About probably 97% of them are going to say no. And they're actually actively living in the LGBTQ plus community. Okay. But every single one of them know that our staff person loves them, but does not affirm their lifestyle, because he has had a one-on-one individual conversation with each of them, and they know that they are loved by him because of the way that he interacts with them on campus, the way that he cares about their life and what's happening in their life. And one of those guys said, I joined your ministry to tear it apart from the inside out. But when I got there and saw how y'all loved me, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. But he knows that we do not affirm his lifestyle choices, but that we love him. And that makes all the difference. And those students may leave our ministry and we may not see them come to know Lord. But later in their life, if they decide, man, I really think that I want to give Jesus a chance, my hope and prayer is that they look back and say, Daniel met me when I didn't trust them. And Daniel was trustworthy and he loved me, so I can give this God thing a chance. And so really the way that we interact with them one-on-one makes a huge difference. So that's all. I'll be here if you have questions, but whatever.